basin of water where they could wash their hands. We're assuming that there was a lower basin where they could easily wash their feet, and that may have been fairly large. We're not really sure. In Solomon's temple, it was a huge tank. I forget how many 100 gallons it held, but in the wilderness sanctuary, it was a little bit smaller, probably. And so that was a symbol of cleansing. So here we have a symbol of sacrifice and forgiveness and protection and power, and there's a symbol of cleansing. And so we can think of what's in the courtyard as what I have up there: cleansing, forgiveness. Now we have foot washing and communion, which reminds us of the forgiveness aspect of Jesus' death. This is a symbol of what Jesus did on the cross. The sacrifice and the cleansing and all of that. And that's the first stage in our salvation, and we call that justification. Something that happens at a point in time. So the courtyard furniture is a symbol of justification. Okay, now we'll go to the, there you can see a little picture of Jesus on the cross, reminding us of what this is showing us. Now we'll go to the holy place, that first apartment there. It was probably, I think it was like 15 feet wide and 30 feet long or something like that. I forget the exact measurements on that. But it was always enclosed. We had golden walls. I don't have walls for this, but there were golden walls and then the beautiful, colorful curtains on the front and the back. And in there we had these various articles of furniture. You can see the table of showbread on the right side, which would have been the north side, because the front was facing east. We have the altar of incense down here right in front of the curtain, and then we have the candlestick on the south side, giving light in that room. We'll look first at the altar, or the table of showbread, which is right over there. I've got to get my glasses on here again. On the table of showbread, there were 12 loaves of unleavened bread in 2 stacks, 6 loaves in each one. And with that bread was some frankincense, incense, and it doesn't say that there was wine or grape juice on that table. But when it describes the articles or the utensils that went with that table, there are utensils, pitchers and cups and things like that. So I'm assuming that there was a drink offering on that table along with the unleavened bread. Now, it's kind of a little bit almost baffling to me when you read where God told him how to make that bread. It says there was about 10 or 12 pounds of flour in each loaf. So there would have been a total of 60 pounds of flour for each stack. Those are some big loaves of unleavened bread. Now, they couldn't have been very large in diameter because the table isn't very big. So they must have been quite thick. But how do you bake loaves of unleavened bread when they're that thick? I'm not sure. Maybe they had ways. But that bread was made new every Sabbath. The priests would eat the week-old bread and put out the new fresh bread every Sabbath. The frankincense was burned as kind of a sacrifice. They probably put in fresh grape juice or wine or whatever it was in the pitcher there. But that was renewed every Sabbath, and that was the bread that David ate when he went to the priest when he was running from King Saul. He went to the priests, and they said, "Well, we don't have any regular bread, but we have the holy bread." That was the bread that they gave him, the bread that had been taken off just the Sabbath before. That was the bread they had, and so that's what David ate. Okay, now the candlestick on the south side. It was a lamp stand with 7 lamps. Now, sometimes you think of it as well, how shall I say it? It was a stand with 7 lamps. So I'm thinking that each one of these lights was a separate lamp. And each day, the priest would go in there and do maintenance on each of those lamps. Make sure that they were filled with oil, trim the wicks. Those of you that have had to deal with kerosene lamps, you've got to trim the wicks, make sure that they're in the right shape and good condition. And so every day the priest would do that, and this was always kept lit. Now, this, we don't have the measurements for this, as far as how large it was, but it says that it was made of a talent of gold, which is approximately 100 pounds of gold. One piece. They had some excellent craftsmen to make that kind of shape out of one single piece of gold. I don't know how they did that. But the way we got to the size here, I'll back up a little bit. In Revelation 4 verse 5, it talks about the 7 spirits of God represented by the 7 lamps before the throne. So there we're talking about this candlestick, and the 7 lights represent the Spirit of God, and we'll get into that in the next session. But it does talk about that in Revelation. But it was made of a single piece of gold formed into that shape. The only way we have an idea of what size it was is on the Arch of Titus. Now Titus was the Roman general that captured Jerusalem in AD 70. And when he went back to Rome after that victory, he had a victory arch made in his memory. And on that, I hope you can see it there, you can see the candlestick from the temple. And comparing the size of it there to the size of the soldiers gave us some idea of how big this may have been. So that's where we got kind of the general size of what this may have looked like. Okay, now the altar of incense was right in front of the curtain, and it was associated with the most holy place. The incense, as the incense was burned, the smoke would go up and kind of make a cloud through the whole sanctuary. That was also made of wood covered with gold. Now out here everything was made of brass. In there everything was made of gold. I should mention the laver, the wash basin, was kind of unique because it says it was made from the brass, the women's brass looking glasses. They had brass mirrors. It was probably a special quality of brass that was more shiny or something. But it was very, very specifically, it says that it was made from the brass of the women's looking glasses. They gave something that helped them in their beauty to make that article of furniture. Kind of an interesting thought. So these things were made of brass. Everything in there was made of gold. Okay, again, the altar of incense was made of wood covered with gold, and it had a censer on top where there was always incense burning. And in Luke chapter 1, where it talks about Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, it talks about he was one of the priests. It was his duty at that time to burn incense while the people were praying outside. And so when the priest would go in there and renew the incense on the altar, it was kind of the time of prayer for the people outside. The incense there is very closely associated with prayer. It's like it rises as a sweet smell to God. Now there's a recipe given in Exodus for what were the ingredients in that incense. And some of them are fairly easy to identify. Frankincense, and there was another one that was quite easy to identify. But there's some ingredients in there, they're not really sure what they were. Some particular exotic incense from India or something. A very special recipe for that incense, and God told the people, don't make that incense for any other purpose. That recipe is specifically for the temple services. And so it was a special recipe. But it was there to always be burning. So, everything that's in the holy place in some way represents Jesus' priestly mediation. What he's doing for us right now. The altar of Spiritual nourishment, we need that.
Amen.
That's available. It's always there. It's part of his mediation. He provides spiritual nourishment so that we can grow spiritually for our character development. We need that. The candlestick represents the Holy Spirit. We need that. We cannot live a Christian life without the help of the Holy Spirit. It doesn't work. It's like you have electronic keyboard or an organ or a computer or whatever. It's a nice piece of equipment, but if it's not plugged into the power source, it does absolutely nothing. We need to be plugged into the power source, and it's there. We need to come there and receive that power for our lives. The altar of incense represents prayer. We need that communication with God. We need to talk to Him. If you never talk to somebody, you don't get to know them, you have no relationship. We need to have that kind of connection with Him. And so, we're talking about spiritual nourishment, enlightenment, communion with God, and that all contributes to our current character development. That's where we are right now. We are living life in this world, and we need what He provides through His mediation there, and that's what we call sanctification. Ellen White talks about sanctification being the work of a lifetime. That's where we're at right now. We're in that process. So we have the priest mediating up there. Now I'm going to open the next set of curtains, if I can do this without stumbling. And I'm going to move this off to the side very carefully. It's a little complicated when I have to walk around here too. You're getting the rare privilege of seeing into the most holy place. Only the high priest was supposed to see that. Even the regular priests were not allowed in there. So we have on our picture up here the most holy place in the back, the inner most sacred apartment of the sanctuary. And we have the Ark of the Covenant there. And it's not written in the Bible, but in Jewish history, and Ellen White talks about it, that the time just before, I think it was before Judah was captured by the Babylonians, there was a threat of the Babylonians coming. Nebuchadnezzar was, wanting to move in. Time of Jeremiah, which we're studying in our Sabbath school lesson, there were people that thought we cannot allow the Ark of the Covenant, this holy piece of furniture, to fall into the hands of these heathen. And so they took the Ark of the Covenant out of the sanctuary and hid it away in some cave somewhere. And as far as I know, it has never been found. Now there are some movies and there's some various people that claim they found it or whatever. I'm a little skeptical of that. But anyhow, when Nebuchadnezzar did come and capture Jerusalem and steal everything out of the sanctuary, the ark was gone. And when Solomon built his temple, there was no ark in that temple. And in the time of Jesus, when Jesus died and the curtain was torn from the top to the bottom, there was no ark in there. But that was a very sacred spot. Okay. The ark was made of acacia wood, again, and covered with gold. And there are certain things that were there. Now that was called the Ark of the Testament. God told Moses, make a special box just for the Ten Commandments. God gave him the Ten Commandments on top of the mountain, and when he gave him those tables of stone, he said, make a box. Now, our Bibles say an ark, but it's really the word for box. Make a box to store this in. And it's the box of the Testament, or the Ark of the Covenant. Those words, Testament and Covenant, are kind of equivalent, so it doesn't matter which one you use. But that box was to keep the Ten Commandments in, specifically for that purpose. And you see there's a couple of other things there. I'm going to go up there and hold them up so you can see them a little better. Recognize this?
Mm-hmm. Aaron's rod.
Aaron's rod. The story behind that was when Aaron was chosen as the high priest, some of the other Levites got jealous. They said, well, why is it that you get all this privilege? Why shouldn't some of the rest of us have some of the privilege of being priests and those kind of things? And so this was a big deal. And Moses said, okay, we're going to find out who God wants to be the priest and the leader. So each leader from each of the tribes was supposed to bring their walking staff, and they all put their names on, and then they put them into the sanctuary. Well, the next morning, one of them had blossoms, leaves, and it even had almonds. Now, we weren't able to get almonds to put on here, but we have the leaves and blossoms. Now, this stick, keep in mind that Aaron was, at that time, 83 years old. So this stick was probably 70 years old. It had been a dry stick that whole time. But God made it alive with leaves and blossoms and mature almonds as a miracle and a reminder of who God chooses. See, the Ark of the Testament is the place where the law was kept, but it also had some of these other things in there as a testimony against the people. It uses that expression. God says, put this in the ark as a testimony against them. This was legal evidence that God chooses your leader. You don't choose your own leader. God chooses your leader. And so he put this in the ark as legal evidence of who God would choose. What do you suppose is in here?
Manna.
Manna. See, when they were traveling, and the people got worried about their food source, God provided manna. And they had it for 40 years from then on. Every morning there was always a constant supply. And he told Moses, take a sample of this manna and put it in a pot and put that in the ark also. Again, evidence of who was their provider. They didn't have to provide for their own stuff. God provided for them. And so this was put in there as legal evidence. If you people are ever wondering who your provider is, here's evidence of who your provider is. You see the Ten Commandments here, and they're blue. Now the Bible doesn't tell us that the commandments are blue, but Jewish tradition says that the original set of Ten Commandments was on blue sapphire. And that makes good sense, because there was a time when God told, right after he gave the law on Mount Sinai, he said, Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 elders, come up and meet with me on the mountain. And so they did. And it says there, I probably got a slide that shows this, but it says that they saw God, and under his throne was a foundation of sapphire. Well, Ellen White says that the law is the foundation of God's government. And so it makes sense that the law is also sapphire. That's what was kept in the ark. Now the second copy, we don't know what it was, because Moses had to go out and get his own slabs of rock. But right now, in these days, sapphire only comes in small pieces. So I don't know whether Moses could find nice big slabs of sapphire. But Moses himself, brought the rocks for the second copy of of the Ten Commandments. Now on this side over here, we have a copy of the Torah, the law, because God, after Moses had given what's in Deuteronomy, he repeated the laws that God had given. He repeated those to the people just before they went into the promised land. And after he had verbally spoken to all the people, he said, I'm going to write this all down. And he gave it to the priests, and he said, you put that with the ark, again, as a testimony against them. Now, in the Bible it says it was put in the side of the ark. It may not have been inside, but it was with the ark, at least. It was in the most holy place. And it says somewhere that it was one of the responsibilities of a king, any of the kings of Israel, that they should write their own copy of the law and study it every day. So copies were made of that law. And in the time of, was it Joash, when they discovered the law in the tabernacle, in the temple, that's probably what they discovered. It was hidden away in some dusty corner somewhere, and in their cleaning process they found the law. And they had forgotten what it said, so they brought it out and read the law, and there was a great revival. And so the Torah was with the ark. We have, on the ark, we have the angels. The lid of the ark, or the top of the box, was called the mercy seat. That's what's in our Bibles, the mercy seat. But literally, the Hebrew word for that is the place of expiation, or the place of covering of sins. That's what that mercy seat stands for. It's the place of expiation. And between the angels, we don't have much written in the Bible about it, but Ellen White talks about it, and it's quite well known that there was a light representing God's actual presence. It's called the Shekinah glory. The word Shekinah, and I'm not sure how to pronounce it exactly, Shekinah or something in Hebrew, means the dwelling. This is where God lives, the dwelling. There's one of the, or several priests in the Old Testament that their names were Shechaniah. That means the dwelling of Yah, or the dwelling of Yahweh, the dwelling of God. But this word here just means the dwelling. It's like the White House. You know, there is only one White House. There's a lot of White Houses, but there's only one White House. This is the dwelling. This is where God was. The angels faced inward on that, and some people think that possibly the glory of this, which, you know, this is fairly bright, but I don't know that it's anywhere near as bright as the Shekinah actually was. That was probably so bright the priest couldn't look at it, kind of like a welding flash. But there's some people that think possibly the pillar of cloud up above was actually an extension of this glory on the outside of the tent. So that's just a possibility. But that place, the presence of God, that's our destination. You know, we start out with justification here, the first step of what Jesus did for us. Then we have our life, sanctification, character development. And our final destination is to be in the presence of God. Now there's some things that happen in between, but that's where we're headed. I kind of missed some of my slides here because I was up there talking, but we'll go through them. There's the ark, there's the Torah scroll, and the Ten Commandments on blue. And here's the verse where it talks about Moses and Aaron going up and seeing God, and the sapphire stone. There was a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were the body of heaven in its clearness. Okay, again, referring back to the law being in blue, the people were told, make tassels, make borders on your garments and put tassels on there, tassels of blue. And this is the verse, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel and bid them that they make fringes in the borders of their garments throughout their generations, and that they put on the fringe of the border a ribbon of blue. And it shall be unto you for a fringe that you may look upon it and remember the commandments of God. and do them, and that you seek not after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you used to go whoring, that you may remember and do my commandments and be holy unto your God. So the blue was a reminder to them of God and His law and His holiness. Okay? So the blue tassels that they would wear were a reminder. This is whose rules you're following. This is who you have as your God. It's interesting that in Revelation, where it talks about Babylon, the prostitute Babylon, it talks about the colors that she is wearing and stuff. There's no blue. He carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet. No blue. Babylon doesn't like God's law. We're going to be talking a little bit later this afternoon about the Day of Atonement, which is a time of judgment. There is judgment and atonement before we get to the presence of God, but that is where we actually want to be. And that's what we call glorification. So we have justification, the first step out here, sanctification, the inner part, and glorification, which is the farthest, the ultimate destination. Here's a satellite picture of the Middle East, and just as an illustration, the Israelites started out over here in Egypt. This is the Red Sea. Okay? They started out over here in Egypt. That was the beginning of their journey. They traveled across the Sinai Peninsula. They went over into the Arabian Peninsula, which at that time was called Midian. And they traveled around there for 40 years. That was their character development. They were justified over here. They were sanctified over there. But their